can turn on 3D again. Once again, this is not going to work if you have it pitched or you move the map comp at all. So just be aware of that. So now if I jump into this pre-comp, you can see we have this and we have some room to play with here. And now I can go over here to the effects and presets panel and I can search for rough and edges, and I can apply this directly to the pre-comp of this route, which is going to treat it as a raster element. So now we're starting to get some nice rough edges here, and now I can just start to play around with this. All right, so I'll bring the complexity up to 10, and now I'll bring the border down to something like 4. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now, once again, if you do have any problems in this project, I imagine it's going to be with one of these effects, because once you start to use vectors inside of pre-comps, or you start to apply effects to vectors and then start to move them around, it can give you some weird results that can be a little difficult to control. Once again, hence why I used this pre-composition. All right, now I'm going to go grab the text tool and we're going to add a title here. Vasco da Gama. I'm going to select this. We'll bump it up to like 300 maybe. Let's reposition it here. And I've got this nice black color, which is looking good, matches the path route. However, this font is not really appropriate for this. So I'm going to switch to a font that I got from Adobe Fonts called Emily Austin. It's this nice script here. And I'm going to pump this up even more, maybe 500. Now, if you want to get this font, you can go over to this website, Adobe Fonts. And this is really cool. You can log in with your Adobe ID, and then you can, let me search this font here. So Emily Austin is right here. And what's cool is once you found the font, you can just click on this activate button, and through Creative Cloud, it'll automatically sync up. And then you can come back here to After Effects and it will be available. You might need to close the panel, reopen it, or close After Effects, reopen it so that it populates. And now I'm going to go ahead and attach this to my world map comp anchor, set it to 3D, and we can reposition it a little bit later. All right, now I need some imagery of Vasco da Gama to include in the animation. So I came over here to Wikipedia, where there are a bunch of different very cool illustrations and different visuals. So I'm going to go with this one right here. I'm going to bring this into Adobe Photoshop. And what I will do is I'll grab the marquee tool with the layer selected. I'll click on select and mask, and then I'll click on this button that says select subject. And then depending on the amount of time you have, you can refine these edges here. I'm going to go ahead and click OK and then hold Control and hit J. And I'm going to turn off our background layer here. So now we have a selection. I'm not too worried about all this crap down here because I'm going to basically just use the top half of him. And now with this transparency here, I can export this out. So go to File, Export, quick export as PNG, and the PNG image format will retain the transparency. So when I bring it over into Adobe After Effects, this will be a transparent background, which is what I need. So now bring this imagery over in here, and I can drop this on top of everything. So now we have our Vasco da Gama right here. I'll just scale this up and kind of position it right over here. And it's looking a little washed out, so I'm going to go to Effects and Presets, and we're going to grab a Curves effect. I'll drop that on the image, and now I'm just going to give it a little bit more contrast by adding a very subtle S-curve here. And now I do not want to attach this to my map, nor do I want to make it 3D. I want this to be in the foreground, and I'm going to have it just subtly moving from left to right. As this map comp animates and all the other elements follow the map, I want him to be separate and just kind of slightly drift. So I don't need him to, well, he can be 3D, but he doesn't need to be. All right, so I'm ready to do some animation of the map. I'm going to go back to the GeoLayers panel, and let's just see what happens if I pitch this out a little bit, maybe zoom. We're going to see any issues right away. And first of all, you can see that we can see past the edges of our actual texture here. So to get around that, I'm going to grab our map comp, and I'm going to toggle these switches and modes back to be able to see our track matte. And we're going to use this actual paper texture as a matte here. So click on that, and we'll use that as an alpha matte. And right away, it gives us those nice edges, or it gives us the alpha edges. You can see toggle transparency. However, it immediately and by default turns off the texture. So simply turn that back on, and now we have this. So this will be a 10-second animation. So at the end here, we want to make sure that our route is nicely framed up here. So we'll make sure that this is zoomed in properly and that he's not blocking any of the actual route here, and that the text can actually be seen. Let me see if I can crank the text back down a little bit. It's a little too big. So I'll go ahead and add some keyframes here to the 10-second mark. And I want to make sure these are linear keyframes because it by default will add them with ease. So I'm just going to control click these. And now we'll go back over here and we'll click or we'll basically select our starting position. So we'll pitch it down a little bit so that there's a pitch move, and then maybe it will be zooming out a little bit. So, and we'll go ahead and add keyframes to all these again, grab them all. Now I'm going to animate old Vasco here, this image. So we'll just do a simple position keyframe him here for the starting position, and then we want him to end up just simply over here. So there's some very subtle movement, but we still want it to be framed up nicely. So I can quickly scrub through this to see what we got going on. Okay, now one of the final things that I need to do here is I want to add some subtle depth of field. And I'm going to do this, I'm going to fake it. We're not going to have real camera depth of field. So all I'm going to do is right click and add a new adjustment layer. And I'm going to place, I don't want the depth of field to affect the image here. So I'm going to place it below this image. We'll call it depth of field. And now I'm going to go back to effects and presets. And we're going to do this very, very easily. I'm just going to go grab a Gaussian blur. Under blur and sharpen, apply that here and crank it way up. And now with this selected, I'm going to go grab my pen tool and we're just going to mask out around it. So I'm going to mask it like this, and then we'll mask it down around here. And you can see we actually need to invert this. So you can quickly click on inverted, or you can just select subtract. And now I'm going to hit F to feather this out, and I'm going to feather it out by like 500 pixels just to see how this looks. We're probably going to need to feather it out a lot more than that. Actually, I just need to bring the blur back down. So we want this to be kind of a subtle. Oh yeah, it's important. Don't forget to finalize this. Then I'll add it to the render queue and we can render it out, see how it looks.